She looked at the janitor and laughed, saying, "If you can play this piano, I'll marry you." The entire room roared with laughter, until he sat down, placed his hands on the keys, and played something that silenced every single guest. The challenge that shocked everyone. "If you can play this piano, I'll marry you." The moment those words left her lips, the room froze. Glasses paused mid-air, conversations died instantly, and every eye turned toward the speaker. That speaker was none other than Sophia Whitehall, the glamorous young billionaire who dominated the business world with her beauty, wealth, and unshakable confidence. She was the type of woman who had everything money could buy, yet she always wanted more attention, more drama, more control. People admired her, but many feared her arrogance. That night, she was hosting one of her legendary parties inside her breathtaking mansion in New York. The chandeliers sparkled like captured stars, the marble floors shone so brightly you could see your reflection, and the air was filled with the smell of expensive wine and perfumes. Powerful businessmen, Hollywood celebrities, and socialites dressed in their finest gowns filled the grand hall. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved silently, carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The entire evening was meant to show off Sophia's wealth and influence. But now the party had turned into something else entirely. Sophia wasn't looking at her rich friends or the musicians hired to entertain. Her sharp eyes were fixed on someone completely out of place. A janitor. In the far corner of the room, half hidden behind a tall vase of roses, stood David. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with skin glistening faintly under the golden lights. His uniform was plain, slightly faded, and his shoes were so worn they squeaked against the polished floor. He held a broom in his hand, clearly trying to finish his work quietly without disturbing the glamorous crowd. But now the spotlight, figuratively and literally, was on him. Sophia's voice rang out again, playful yet cutting. "You there, yes, the janitor. If you can play that piano well enough to impress me, I'll marry you." A ripple of laughter spread across the hall. Guests turned to each other with mocking grins, whispering behind their jeweled hands. "Did she just say, marry him?" One woman giggled. "A janitor? Oh, this is too good," another whispered, sipping her champagne. "He probably doesn't even know the difference between piano keys and computer keys," a man sneered. David froze. His hand tightened on the broom. He hadn't expected to be noticed at all. He was a shadow in this glittering world, invisible to the rich and powerful. And now, all eyes were stabbing into him like sharp knives. Sophia tilted her head, clearly enjoying the spectacle. Her smile wasn't kind. It was the smug grin of someone who loved humiliating others. She gestured grandly toward the magnificent black grand piano in the center of the room. It gleamed under the lights, a symbol of wealth and class, a centerpiece for her parties. "If you can play it well enough to impress me," she repeated, her voice louder, dripping with mockery, "I'll marry you. That's a promise." The crowd burst into even louder laughter. A billionaire marrying a janitor? The very idea was ridiculous to them. David lowered his gaze, trying to make himself smaller, wishing the floor would swallow him whole. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight. He wasn't used to people laughing at him so openly either. The broom in his hand suddenly felt heavier, as if the weight of all their cruel stares pressed down on his shoulders. Some guests egged him on just for entertainment. "Come on, man, show us what you've got." "Yeah, don't be shy, play us a tune." "This is the best party game ever." But beneath the laughter, there were also whispers of disgust. Why is a janitor even in this room during the party? Can't she keep the help out of sight? This is embarrassing. The entire situation had turned into a spectacle. The poor man was being mocked, not just for his job, but for daring to exist in their world of wealth. Sophia leaned back against the piano, crossing her arms. Her diamond necklace glittered as she smirked at David. To her, this was just another game, another way to prove her superiority. She didn't expect him to actually touch the piano, let alone play it. To everyone else, this was a joke, a cruel but entertaining one. A janitor trying to impress a billionaire with music? Impossible. But what they didn't know was that this moment, this challenge, would change everything. Because David wasn't just a janitor, he was something far more. And before the night was over, the same people laughing at him would rise to their feet in stunned silence. Who was David? David had been working as a janitor in Sophia Whitehall's mansion for nearly a year. Every day, he swept the polished marble floors, cleaned the grand staircases, and dusted the priceless antiques that lined the halls. But to the people who lived in that glittering world, David was invisible. He was the help, nothing more. Guests walked past him without so much as a glance, sometimes dropping napkins or spilling drinks without apology, knowing David would clean it up. His presence was like the background music of the mansion, always there, but never noticed. Yet beneath his quiet, humble exterior, David carried two things most people in that mansion could never imagine: a painful past and a secret talent so extraordinary that, if revealed, it could shake them to their core. Years ago, David wasn't just another man with a mop and broom. He was something rare, a musical prodigy. He grew up in a small, working-class town far from the wealth of New York. His childhood home was modest: peeling wallpaper, creaky wooden floors, and a second-hand upright piano that dominated the living room. That piano was old, scratched, and missing a few ivory keys, but to David, it was a treasure chest of magic. His mother, a gentle woman with tired hands, played it every evening. She wasn't rich or famous, but when her fingers touched the keys, the whole house filled with warmth. She played gospel hymns, soft lullabies, and sometimes lively jazz that made David laugh and clap along. At just 5 years old, David began pressing keys, imitating the sounds. By the age of 8, he was playing entire songs by ear. His teachers called him a genius, a boy who didn't need sheet music because the melodies lived inside him. By 12, he could play complex symphonies, improvising with a flair that stunned even professional musicians who happened to hear him. His dream was crystal clear. He would become a world-class pianist traveling the globe, filling concert halls with music. But life is not always kind to dreamers. When David was 16, tragedy struck. His mother, the one who had nurtured his love for music, passed away after a sudden illness. Her death left a hole in his heart that no sound could fill. His father, already struggling to provide for the family, fell deeper into debt. Bills piled up, collectors knocked on the door, and the dream of piano lessons or auditions became impossible luxuries. David was forced to make a choice: chase his dream and watch his family fall apart, or sacrifice it all to help them survive. He chose survival. He dropped out of school, took jobs washing dishes, moving furniture, and later cleaning offices. Every paycheck went to keeping the lights on, keeping food on the table. The piano, the love of his life, was left behind. Yet, even as his hands grew calloused from labor instead of music, the melodies never left his mind. Years passed. David moved to New York, hoping for better opportunities, but life was still harsh. He rented a tiny apartment with peeling paint and a single window that barely let in light. There was no room for a piano, no money for lessons, no chance to chase his forgotten dream. But at night, when the city finally grew quiet, David would close his eyes and imagine his mother's voice telling him, "God gave you a gift. Never hide it." He'd rest his fingers on the edge of his small table, tapping out invisible notes, hearing full symphonies in his mind. To him, the music was alive. It was part of him, breathing, burning, waiting for the day it could be heard again. And now here he was, standing in Sophia Whitehall's golden ballroom, broom in hand, dressed in a faded janitor's uniform, surrounded by people dripping in diamonds and arrogance, and they were laughing at him. They didn't know who he was. They didn't know the years of pain, sacrifice, and hidden genius that lived in his soul. To them, he was nothing more than a janitor, a man to mock, to humiliate, to make fun of for their evening entertainment. But what cut deepest wasn't their laughter. It was that Sophia's cruel challenge had singled out the very thing that defined him. She hadn't mocked his job, or his clothes, or his poverty. She had mocked his music, the gift that once made him a child prodigy, the gift his mother had died believing would take him to greatness. And now that gift, his secret, his soul, was being dragged into the spotlight as a joke. David's heart pounded in his chest. His throat tightened. For years he had hidden his talent, keeping it safe from a world too cruel to appreciate it. And yet here he was, forced to decide: stay invisible and let them laugh, or show them the truth. A truth so powerful it could silence the entire room. The challenge: laughter turns to silence. "Go on then," one of the guests shouted, his voice dripping with mockery. "Show us what a janitor can do." The words sparked laughter across the hall. Champagne glasses clinked as people leaned toward one another, whispering cruel predictions about how badly this would end. Some pulled out their phones, eager to capture the humiliation. David stood frozen for a moment, his broom still in hand. His heart pounded against his chest, each beat louder than the chatter of the mocking crowd. He looked at Sophia Whitehall, the billionaire who had issued the challenge. She lounged against the grand piano like a queen testing her servant, her lips curved into that smug smile. To her, this was entertainment, a cruel joke at his expense. David's instinct screamed at him to walk away. Why should he play for them? These people weren't here to listen to music. They weren't here to appreciate beauty. They were here to laugh, to mock, to see him stumble. But then, like a whisper from another world, he heard his mother's voice in his heart. "God gave you a gift, never hide it." Her words echoed through his mind, steadying his trembling hands. This wasn't about Sophia. It wasn't about the guests. It wasn't even about the challenge. It was about honoring the gift that lived inside him, the gift his mother had nurtured, the gift he had buried for far too long. David set the broom aside and slowly walked toward the piano. The crowd's laughter grew louder, as if each step he took added fuel to their amusement. "Careful," someone chuckled. "He might break the piano before he plays it." "Oh, this is going to be painful," another whispered, stifling a laugh. "Maybe he only knows chopsticks," a woman sneered. David ignored them. His pulse hammered in his ears, but his face remained calm. He reached the polished black Steinway Grand, its surface gleaming under the golden chandelier light. For a moment, he stood there, just staring at it. The instrument he had once loved, the friend he had abandoned out of necessity. With a deep breath, he sat on the cushioned bench. His rough, calloused hands hovered above the ivory keys, trembling ever so slightly. The room buzzed with anticipation. A few guests even pulled their chairs closer, smirking, waiting for the failure that would give them another story to tell at future parties. And then, David pressed the first key. At first, the sound was soft, fragile, almost hesitant, like a whisper lost in the grandness of the hall. Some guests chuckled under their breath, convinced their mockery was about to be proven right. But then he continued. The second note, then the third, and suddenly the fragile sound grew stronger, richer, fuller. His fingers began to glide across the keys, weaving a melody so haunting, so beautiful, that the laughter slowly began to die. Within seconds, the ballroom was transformed. What had been a stage for mockery was now a sanctuary of sound. The music wasn't just notes, it was emotion. Every key carried a story, of his childhood wonder, of his mother's love, of the heartbreak and sacrifice that had buried his dream. David's fingers moved with lightning speed, each movement so precise yet so effortless it was as if he had been born to sit at this piano. He wasn't reading sheet music. He didn't need to. The music flowed straight from his soul, pouring into the room like a river breaking free after years of being dammed. The crowd, once jeering, now sat frozen. Glasses hovered mid-air. Mouths hung open. Every ear strained to catch each note. Every heart pulled deeper into the spell he was casting. One woman clasped her chest, her eyes filling with tears. A man leaned forward, forgetting his drink entirely. Even the waiters had stopped moving, their trays still, as though time itself had paused to listen. The laughter was gone, in its place was awe. And Sophia? Her confident smirk had disappeared. At first she had watched with amusement, expecting nothing more than clumsy fumbling. But now her heart raced. Her eyes widened, her lips parted, and she could barely breathe. She had never heard music like this. Not from her expensive hired pianists, not from world-class performers she paid to play at her parties. This was something else. This was pure genius. David closed his eyes as he played, lost in the sound. To him, the room no longer existed. There were no mocking guests, no smug billionaire, no chandeliers or marble floors. There was only the piano, only the music, only the memory of his mother smiling as she listened to him play as a boy. The notes rose higher, swelling with power, then dipped lower, trembling with sorrow. The piano seemed to weep and rejoice all at once, its voice alive under David's touch. By the time he struck the final chord, the entire hall was silent. Not a whisper, not a breath, just stunned, aching silence. And in that silence, everyone understood. This man, this janitor they had mocked, wasn't ordinary. He was extraordinary. The turning point, a genius revealed. David's fingers danced across the keys with a grace and power that silenced every corner of the golden ballroom. The piece he played wasn't one from a polished concert program or an expensive sheet of music. No, it was a song from his childhood, a song his mother had played for him every Sunday evening. The melody carried warmth and tenderness woven with notes of sorrow and hope. It was the music of a woman who had believed in her son's gift, even when the world didn't. And now, through David's hands, her voice returned. Each note poured into the hearts of the listeners like liquid fire. It was more than sound. It was story. They could hear the innocence of a boy's first piano lessons, the heartbreak of losing his mother, the years of struggle, and the quiet, unbroken strength of a man who had never stopped carrying music in his soul. By the time the final note rang out, the room was transformed. The silence that followed was unlike any silence the mansion had ever held. No glasses clinked, no whispers filled the air. It was the silence of reverence, the kind of silence people give only to greatness. And then the applause began. It started with one man standing suddenly, his hands striking together with a force that echoed. Then another, then another. Within moments, the entire room erupted in thunderous applause. Guests shouted, "Bravo! Incredible! Magnificent!" Their voices rose above the clapping, filling the hall with an energy that had nothing to do with wealth, status, or power. Some stood on their feet, clapping so hard their palms turned red. Others wiped tears from their eyes, shocked at the emotions the janitor's music had pulled from them. Even the servers, frozen in awe during the performance, joined in quietly, nodding with admiration. This wasn't pity applause. This was the recognition of true genius, and in the middle of it all, David simply sat there, his hands resting gently on the piano, his head slightly bowed. He wasn't basking in their approval. He didn't need their praise. For him, the performance wasn't about proving himself. It was about honoring his mother and finally letting the music inside him breathe again. But Sophia Whitehall, she was not clapping. She sat frozen in her chair, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. Only minutes earlier she had mocked him, treating him like a clown for her amusement. She had believed he would fail, that he would embarrass himself. She had been so certain of her superiority. And now she felt small. Her confident smirk had vanished. Her painted lips trembled as she whispered almost to herself, "Who? Who are you?" Her voice was soft, shaky, unlike the commanding tone she usually carried. David lifted his eyes and met hers. His gaze was calm, steady, almost gentle, and he spoke only 3 words. Just a janitor. Those words hit her harder than the music itself. They cut through her pride, slicing at the arrogance she wore like armor. Because in that moment, Sophia realized something she had never wanted to admit. She had judged him not by his talent, not by his heart, but by his status. By the label society had stamped on him. To her, he had been invisible, unworthy of respect, unworthy of notice. But the truth, the truth, was that David was greater than anyone in that room. Not because of money, not because of fame, but because he had something no amount of wealth could buy. Soul. Sophia's throat tightened. Shame burned through her chest, hotter than fire. She thought of all the times she had dismissed people like him, the workers, the cleaners, the ones she never acknowledged as human beings with stories, with dreams. And now, one of them had exposed the emptiness of her world in front of everyone. Her diamonds, her designer gown, her mansion, all suddenly felt meaningless. None of it could compete with the raw, breathtaking beauty of David's music. The applause continued to thunder, echoing through the hall, but Sophia could barely hear it over the sound of her own heartbeat. For the first time in her life, she felt powerless. And yet, something else stirred in her chest, hidden beneath the shame. Admiration, respect, a strange, unfamiliar warmth. Because genius had just revealed itself before her eyes, And it had come from the very man she had mocked. The ending, a lesson that changed everything. As the applause finally died down, an uncomfortable silence settled over the ballroom. Dozens of wealthy eyes turned, not to David, but to Sophia Whitehall. After all, she had made the promise. If you can play this piano, I'll marry you. And now the janitor she had mocked had just delivered a performance so breathtaking that no one in the room could deny his genius. The question hung heavy in the air. Would she keep her word? Sophia's face burned under the weight of that expectation. For the first time in her privileged life, she felt trapped, not by walls or doors, but by her own arrogance. Everyone waited, some with curiosity, others with smirks, ready to watch her wriggle out of the mess she had created. Would the billionaire really marry the janitor? Or would she break her word and reveal to everyone that her challenge had been nothing more than cruelty? Her heart pounded. Her throat tightened. The choice lay before her, and it was a test of character she had never expected to face. Finally, Sophia rose to her feet. Her diamond heels clicked against the marble floor as she crossed the room. All eyes followed her every step. The confidence she usually carried like a crown was gone. In its place was something unfamiliar: humility. She stopped in front of David. He looked up at her calmly, his expression unreadable, as if he wasn't expecting anything from her at all. That, more than anything, unsettled her. Slowly she extended her hand. Her voice, usually sharp and commanding, softened into something fragile. "Forgive me," she said. "I mocked you, I thought you were beneath me, but tonight you've shown me what true greatness is." The crowd gasped softly at her words. Never before had they heard Sophia Whitehall admit fault. She was known for winning every argument, crushing every competitor, dismissing anyone who dared to challenge her. And yet here she was, publicly apologizing to a man she had once ridiculed. David studied her for a moment, then gently shook her hand. "It wasn't about you," he said quietly. "It was about the music." Those simple words struck her harder than any insult could have, because they reminded her that David hadn't played for her approval, or the applause of the crowd, or even the promise of marriage. He had played because it was who he was. His music came from a place she couldn't buy, couldn't own, and couldn't control. And in that moment, Sophia knew the truth. Marriage had never been the point. The promise was nothing but a reckless challenge thrown out of arrogance. What mattered now was the lesson. From that night onward, Sophia was never the same. She used her wealth and influence not to humiliate, but to lift. She introduced David to world-class musicians, arranged for him to record his first album, and told the world his story. Her public admission of his genius spread quickly, and soon the name David the Janitor Pianist appeared in newspapers, magazines, and television shows. Concert halls that once seemed impossible now opened their doors to him, and every time he sat at a piano, he carried with him the memory of that night. The night he turned mockery into respect and humiliation into triumph. But David remained humble. Fame did not change him. Wealth did not tempt him. He still lived simply, still carried himself with quiet dignity. To him, the real victory wasn't in the applause, or the opportunities, or even Sophia's support. The real victory was that he had honored his mother's words: "Never hide your gift." As for the guests who had laughed at him, they never forgot that night. Some felt shame when they remembered their cruel whispers. Others carried the memory as a reminder never to judge a person by their status. And Sophia, though she remained a billionaire with all her luxuries, never again looked at people the same way. She had once believed respect could be bought with money, demanded with power, or earned through fame. But David had shattered that illusion. Respect, she realized, had to be given freely, to every human being, no matter their position. Because greatness doesn't always wear a crown or walk in designer shoes or arrive with a title. Sometimes greatness sweeps the floors. Sometimes greatness carries a broom. And sometimes greatness sits quietly in the corner until the world finally gives it a chance to speak. David's story became more than music. It became a symbol of hope. For every person overlooked, every talent dismissed, every dream buried under the weight of survival. He showed the world that genius can rise from the most unexpected places, that dignity is not defined by status, and that sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is simply to be true to their gift. Sophia Whitehall may have been a billionaire, but David taught her something her money could never buy: respect. And in that, he had already won. If this story inspired you, don't just keep it to yourself. Hit that like button, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe for more powerful stories that will touch your heart.